What is the Klezmer Archive Project? It's a really good question. This project came to be in a lot of ways because I think many, if not most, if not all of us in this room are involved with klezmer music in some way or fashion. And many, if not all of us, have thought over the years it would be really useful and really helpful if there was a way to organize all the things that we know about klezmer music kind of in one kind of central location. And if it couldn't be a physical location, now in our digital worlds, that could this be like a digital space? And this project in its very beginnings was the union of two groups of people who happen to have been sort of actively working on this idea independently. And the bringing together of those two mini teams or mini idea, those groups of dreamers, was literally a sidewalk conversation at Yiddish New York, which shows you the importance of gathering in person, and which we're looking forward to getting back to soon. But so we have this dream, many of us have this dream of like collecting everything we know about klezmer and putting it into one place. And we're all, I'm sure, quite aware of the issues that we have in our particular corner of the musical world, in that we have a music of oral tradition. We have a music in which the names of the tunes are, if they're not very general, like Frelachs or Hora or Jock, they're very specific, but radically different for perhaps what we would call the same melody, right? So we have like multiple dimensions of complexity in our music. That makes it challenging to archive this music in a useful way, using existing archival structures. And that's the genesis of this project, is to try to be a place. This project was written to create a space where we could work on a high level, on the high level of an institutional archival collection in a digital space, but that would also be responsive to the community, and that would allow for community contributions of information, opinions, and other data about on the unit of the tune, as opposed to other kinds of narratives. And that's how we wrote, that's where we're coming from with this project. And before I turn it over to Matthew, I'd like to just state very briefly the results of our first user experience visioning, which was led by Skylar, who you'll hear again from in a minute. She's waving right now. She asked the project team and some of our closest friends to vision what this archive should be like. And then we all wrote lots and lots and lots and lots of words. And she and Skylar distilled them down into 9 core attributes. And I'm just going to list them off very quickly, and we can follow up on them later. This archive tool, this digital archive tool, should be open, a community resource, and that everything built in it and for it will be open and available and free to use for technologists, musicians, and scholars alike. And that anyone with the relevant kinds of knowledge and information will be invited to contribute, which is also why you're here today. Access. The archive will make resources that were previously inaccessible open to all users. And I'll just stop there. Outreach. This archive will serve as a departure point for outreach into communities that are not yet aware of klezmer music in a deep way, and will also serve as an intake point for people who are just beginning to explore klezmer as a music and what has become the music of the klezmer revival, broadly speaking. And at the same time, being a place of interest to people who are scholars on a high level. Analysis, we want to make sure that we are making space for and creating the opportunity to do groundbreaking ethnomusicology and computational musicological research on our corpus of music as it grows. We want to be an authoritative reference point. That sort of goes without saying. So keeping high standards of curatorial standards and editorial standards is key. This tool has to be organized. That goes without saying, but sometimes you have to say that, too much, we're flooded with information. And so how you organize your data and how you make it searchable is a critical concern. We need to create standards for the digitization of tunes and analysis of tunes. And we need to have a very robust search I think as Skylar wrote, is feature 0 for this tool. Because if you can't search for it, you can't find it. And then once again, that goes without saying, but it's surprising how hard it is sometimes to search collections when you have very specific requirements, and particularly in Klezmer, where everything is called Freilich or Skoczna, right? So the role of metadata attribution and domain specific, that is corpus specific metadata, is very key here. And lastly, but not least, this archive should be curated. This has to be curated so that we keep our institutional standards. Does anybody have, I'm gonna ask for questions in a minute. And I'm gonna turn it over to Matthew so he can say a few words about his interest because he has to leave. But I wanna also first say that one of the reasons that we've asked you here today is for you to ask us questions as we present to you our vision of this archival tool, and also to ask for your help going forward beyond the confines of this meeting. We are doing lots and lots of research. We are taking meetings with all kinds of people who can help us understand what we need to learn about libraries, archive structures, data structures, search, computational musicology, and a whole plethora of topics. And so we're asking, by inviting you here, we're asking you to help us extend our reach so that if you see an area that we're talking about and you know somebody who's really good or very expert in that area, we would love to be connected with that person or with those people or with those institutions after the fact. And so with that, I'm going to turn this over. We have kind of a bit of a program where we're going to lay out kind of the different aspects of the tool, but I want to first turn it over to Matthew because he has to leave early. And so I'd like to just invite you, Matthew, to introduce yourself and talk about your work as a musician and as a programmer and what you're doing here in the archive team.
Yeah, thank you, Christina. So I'm Matthew. I'm a violinist and I'm on the tech team with Max and Dan. I'll speak a bit to sort of how the tech team is approaching things right now and how we got here, and sort of what differentiates the mindset in this project from other projects we've been involved in or attempts at projects we've been involved in. So as Christina mentioned, this whole thing sort of came together in a sidewalk conversation during Yiddish New York, when I think I was talking to Christina and then Max was behind me and sort of heard something I said along the lines of, as somebody with a computer science background, as a software engineer, I and other people like me tend to view problems in a very specific way that other people don't necessarily view problems. Whereas many people see tech and try and fit their problems to existing tech, we have the tool sets to build whatever solutions best fit the problem. So we fit the solution to the problem, not the problem to the solution. And this is both very powerful. This means that with enough time, we can build basically anything, but it's also pretty dangerous because really hard problems take a really long time to solve and often can't be done by an individual. So I had tried approaching some of these sub-problems related to Klezmer of creating certain tools to help with searching, or just sort of network experiments looking at how Klezmer tunes are connected to each other. And I had tried approaching these in the past in my own research. I've long had interests in topics related to computational musicology. And for the most part, I failed. I had tried to do these on my own as small experiments. They sort of bore future potential, but they weren't things I could solve on my own. But then Max mentioned that he had been doing similar things, and we realized that many of us sort of software engineer Klezmorim hybrids were all doing the same thing. We were all trying to solve some of these really challenging problems on our own, but we were all sort of trying to solve the same problems. They weren't necessarily always phrased the same way, but they were all sort of connected to the same root. And it was at that moment that I think we realized that we could solve these problems if we all just came together and tried to solve them together, thus leading to the current tech team, which is the three of us sort of supplemented by a much larger hive mind of existing research in the field, experts we've been consulting with, and as we continue to expand in the future, more people helping to contributing to this project. I think there are a few unique aspects to this project, and I'm using unique in a very broad sense because, like Christina was mentioning, there are corpus-specific considerations when constructing this archive. I think there are many other parallel corpus-specific considerations that could apply to other archives that don't yet exist and that nobody is working on, which means that the research that we're doing here of developing a technical vocabulary around a corpus-specific archive actually has the potential to apply even more broadly to other realms of music, where many existing archives don't necessarily try to fit, like I was saying, the solution to the problem, but rather the problem to existing solutions solely because of technical limitations. And while our focus, of course, right now is solely klezmer, I think being informed by the broader spectrum of how computational ethnomusicology as a field is developing is equally invigorating to us just from a technical perspective and also for looking decades down the road what this means sort of for the development of music and computational tools. Uh, One more point I'll quickly address is just what this means when I say computational something, because we get a lot of questions about this, and for people who aren't software engineers might not know what this actually means. So basically, in the broadest sense, this means having a computer do a lot of work that us as humans could do, but don't really want to do. So whereas I could do the same task over and over again, I could also train a computer to do that. And for some problems, a computer can do it immediately. So for instance, if I want to add some really big numbers together, a computer already knows how to do that. If I want to transcribe handwritten sheet music, a computer has potential to be able to do that, but needs to be trained to do that. So that's something where the work that we're doing right now is actually benefiting us right now, but also benefiting us down the road because we have what we call training data. We have human confirmed data that allows us to teach the computer to do even more for us. And once we have the computer doing even more for us, we can do simple things like searching a collection of music that's been digitized, but we can also do much more complicated things like looking for overlapping melodic subsequences and constructing a graph within minutes of every single tune that we have in our collection and how melodically similar they are or how similar they are in macro structure. We can do things that if we were to do them by hand would be impractical, if not impossible. And I think that's the key in all of this. Whenever you hear this computational musicology term being thrown around, we're not necessarily replacing what we're doing currently, but we're building the tools so that we as humans can do even more human things. We're making it so that we can do a little bit less of the manual labor going forward and focus even more on the high level corpus wide, really cool analysis that we couldn't do otherwise, which definitely as engineers as well as musicians, I think this is the other beautiful feature of this team, which is we all have specific domain expertise, but we're also all Yiddishists and Klezmorim, and we all love this music and are really intimately familiar with the material that we're working with. So I know I personally have a klezmer band, Bamela, and have been digging through this material as we discover amazing new tunes and adapting it, and that's motivating the other work that I'm doing here. And we all have our own version of that. So yeah, going forward, I'm really excited to sort of share tools that we build, whether they're these sort of long-term big vision goals of building this network structure for the archive, or the many other tools that we'll be building that have sort of smaller but equally important purposes along the way.
Thanks, Matthew.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. I have one question that came up from Eliana Bressler, and I'm not going to answer it in the way that she asked it, but I am going to answer it. She asked, is there a list of who's officially doing what so far? Just curious. And I'm going to answer that by saying that we have one flautist, we have 3 violins, 1 clarinet, a cymbal, and an accordion player in our research team. So that kind of like, that tells you something. It tells you something about our team. It describes one of our superpowers, which is that we, as Matthew just mentioned, we're all musicians. We're vast majority of musicians, and specifically klezmer musicians on the team. So you know, we're really intimately, we're invested in the solution as musicians as well as in technologists. So great. Is there an idea to perform all these music? Yes. It's a lot of music, but yes, ultimately, yes. I'm gonna keep moving through. I want to make sure that everybody on our team gets the chance to do a little, to introduce themselves and to talk about some of the things that they're excited about and some of the things that they're working on. So I'm going to move on to introduce Skylar Versteeg, who is, amongst other things, a UX specialist. She initiated our visioning process that led to these 9 attributes I described. And she is taking the lead on our UX, also known as user experience research. And this was a new thing to me to learn that if you want to build a tool for your community, the first thing that you should do is you should ask the community what they need. Oddly enough, this was a revelation to me. So I'm going to hand over to Skylar to talk about that part of the work.
All right. Hello, everyone. Yeah, as Christina has said, I am a UX specialist or user experience researcher. And the way that I think about that is and this type of research exists between the technology and the people who end up using the technology. And my role on this project is to really explore how community members, how people who are eventually going to use whatever resource we create, conceptualize and engage with Klezmer, so that way we can make something that is kind of built into the bones of the project that mirrors how people actually approach the music. The idea here is that if we understand how people and people of different backgrounds and levels of familiarity conceptualize Klezmer on their own outside of the computer screen, we can create something based on that natural understanding and that way of approaching the music, basically called a mental model, rather than basing a project around existing formats that are not tailor-made to our needs and the specific needs of this community. Basically, how users, that basically means all of you, understand and interact with Klezmer tunes is expected to have significant implications for how best to make information available to everyone. And what we've been recently focusing on within the UX research portion of this project is what we've been calling the mental model interviews. And this involves talking to a wide variety of people from within the community, scholars, musicians, people who are kind of novice to the world of Klezmer, about their backgrounds, what they would expect and want from a resource like this, but also how people think about Klezmer tunes and interact with them within different contexts, so that way we have that understanding and can mirror that in whatever we end up building.
Great, thank you, Skylar. Yes, it's been a very exciting part of we've had some really just spectacular interviews so far, and we're lining more of them up. So don't be surprised if you get an email or a phone call inviting you to join us for one of these conversations. Another key part of our work has been working with a tool called the Networker. This is a tool that was designed by Michelle Bizinski, who I think is here. So hello, Michelle. And this is the Networker is a topic mapping tool. And if you want to know more about topic mapping, please get in touch with me afterwards. I can explain sort of more detail what it is. But what I observe in this tool is that this is a way for people to make topics, to relate ideas to each other in a very facile, a very easy almost conversational way. Like, you know, this tune is named Otazoi. This tune was recorded by so-and-so. And you can write almost stream of consciousness and create a basic graph database, which links items with relationships to each other. And so we've been using this tool as well. And Michelle has been so gracious as to give us access to this tool at a very heavily discounted nonprofit academic rate for us to use it as a way to experiment also with our user experience research. And what we're using this for is to try to get what we hold in our heads as musicians out onto the page in sort of discrete terms and relationships. So I'm going to turn it over to Eleanor to describe some of the work that we've been doing in our networker experiments.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Christina. Thank you all for being here. So I am violinist and singer, and I'm also associate sound archivist at the YIVO Institute for Jewish Research and a PhD candidate. But now I'm going to share my screen and show you a little bit what we've been doing with the networker. So here it is. I'm gonna look up to my other screen, so don't bother with that. So it's designed by Infoloom. Hold on, excuse me. Yes, I want to see you as well. Okay. Here is something. So we started to try to experiment with two main problems or ways of thinking about klezmer tunes. The first one was around the Russian share as a tune family or dance genre, but like tune family, meaning that it's we call it family of tune also, with many individual expressions that are different tunes, that are different melodies. And the question of defining what a tune is kind of one of our topic of discussions here. So for example, here is one occurrence of a Russian share that has as a title Russian share. It's the dance genre is a share defined as a dance genre, and this little circle shows that we defined a specific scope for the word share because it can the same word can have different meaning. It was recorded on 78 RPM disc, printed in the Kamen book. Here we have a little note, double check, because we were doing this like sort of informally, and we haven't recorded by Abe Schwartz, etc. So, but so if we want to see all the other Russian shares that we sort of started to look at, here are some other Russian shares, and we sort of started doing similar explorations. I mean, this one is less explored yet, but here we have another occurrence, Russian share, Ukrainian SSR band, etc. So it's very easy to turn those into graphs. So this is at the very first level, and then it's possible to sort of zoom out in the graph and see more information appear. So here are it's the same list that I just showed of the different Russian share. And here is zoom. So second level of zooming, we can see a lot more things that were also listed in this. So I'm not going to go too much into details. You can also get in touch with us for if you are curious about this, or directly with Michelle too.
I have a comment responding to we have a question in the comments that maybe we can respond to while we're looking at this in conversation, Eleanor, which is that Ilana asked, are there recordings attached to these nodes? And the quick answer is that not in the networker, because the networker itself is not our destination tool, is not the Klezmer Archive. This is, as much as anything else, this is a way for us to, it's a tool that we are using to help understand how we relate tunes to each other and how we as humans, can you keep the graph up, actually one of the graphs up? Yeah, so that the networks that we sort of keep in our brains between different pieces of information about a tune, and how we can tell one Russian share from another Russian share, and what is the additive information that we want to have attached to it in order to be able to figure out which one we're talking about. And so, yes, for certainly in the eventual Klezmer Archive tool, we will have hopefully a number of different resources. That could be a pitch map, it could be a melody in sheet music form, it could be an original manuscript as an image, and there could be a link to a sound file that is accessible in a publicly accessible place, such as the Mayrent collection or the FAU archives, some kind of a permalink. We will not ordinarily be housing these things ourselves. Elena, does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, in the meantime, I mean, there is a possibility to like link to a YouTube link or to add a screenshot of a incipit of a tune or something like that. That is doable. We haven't figured out every aspect of it yet, but we're learning how to use it, and it's very intuitive. So the whole point of doing this is to help us understand how musicians think about tunes. So that's kind of what we're trying to do here. So another example that we took, so here is the list of topics we came up with. So they can be dates, they can be,
A
people,
tempo.
Tonality, like so yeah, we had conversations about Joc Mare, and I knew this one tune that is a sort of a Romanian hora. And so this is another example of, I mean, we temporarily called it Joc Mare Eleanor, but it's a tune I learned in Weimar. So this is the example. This is sort of the opposite example, where we have a single melody that have many different names and occurrences in different locations. So it is part of the Joc dance genre. It is a hora mare in Romanian, and it has sections in common with another tune, which we decided is not the same tune because it only has one section in common. So, oh no, sorry. Here, 3 first sections have the same melody. Okay, so no, it has. Okay, let's look at this relation. How do we go? So we can also look at the relations themselves. Sections in common with here. So, okay, that's not what I was expecting to find. Okay, we're just starting this experiment. So, okay, I'm gonna just go back to the Joc Mare for now, because we're still kind of fiddling around with it. But so yeah, so it has 3 sections had the same melody. So is it? So the question is, oh yeah. So we decided it is a variant of it because it had 3 sections in common. We also found that it's a variant of another hora mare here that is recorded on the album Rencontre avec la Roumanie, on Electracord, blah, blah, blah. So that way, and here is a YouTube video, actually, a link to the YouTube video. So that way we can, create those network of topics so that we can understand better what the tunes are.
Yeah. Yeah, we have a question. Another question came up from Hankus, which maybe you didn't see, Eleanor. And I think let's go. Can we go back to? I want to keep moving. So let's maybe stop our screen share for now. Hankus brings up the question. Well, what are the boundaries of Klezmer? It's like that's a great question, and I wrote back TBD. But that's not actually the answer. I think that in this particular example, what we see is the ability, we have potentially the ability to, over time, explore relationships that help us understand, in particular, transitional repertoire and the cosmopolitan repertoire, right? Because we have a melody that has become accepted into klezmer practice, for example, certainly in the later 20th century. This particular joc has become commonly performed. It is by many, I would imagine that most people would say that it is part of the klezmer repertoire at this date, but it very clearly has origins in a Romanian context. So that is a case that's quite separate. But I think we will discover that there are many cases that are much more intimately connected, where we have like Moldavian, particularly with the Moldavian Bessarabian music, where we'll have examples that are, in the Bessarabian repertoire and that have been for a very long time in klezmer repertoire. The Hasapiko repertoire also is very deeply much this way. We have currently performed Greek Hasapiko that are in Beregovsky, for example. And so I think with these sort of computational tools, we'll be able to explore those connections in a much, over time, we'll be able to explore those connections in different ways than we can now. So that's not really an answer to your question, but it's something we do think about quite a lot. Does that help?
Oh, thank you. Yeah. No, it's helpful. I just, what I see a lot of now is that because the post-Holocaust European repertoire that's identified with klezmer is sometimes defined by, say, groups like musicology or groups that do Hungarian music, Romanian music. It seems like, at least what I encounter with students these days, is that if they call it klezmer, it's klezmer. And I would be careful about that.
Yes, thank you for raising that. That's actually great. Yeah, I'm very interested in that question. Even some of my own work from Maramuresh, my dear mentor Zev Feldman says, great music. It's Jewish, not klezmer, and there are distinctions to be drawn there, right? So we're hopeful that as a curated resource, that we will, without being exclusionary, be able to identify where some of these borders and boundaries exist. Now, borders are contested. Borders are always contested, whether they're on a map or whether they're in our minds. So, but that's a productive, but those edges and those borders are very productive spaces. And that's what we would like to be able to surface in a productive way and allow for commentary and discussion in the medium of this space, that this space itself becomes a place where those discussions can happen in a curated and respectful way. I want to
make comment on this.
Yes, please.
I just see the comment. We don't want a war over our boundaries, and I totally agree with that. And we've been talking a lot about fuzziness, both in terms of defining the tunes, and I think defining klezmer as a genre also has that element, and so the boundaries are also where it breathes, right? So I think we should keep that in mind.
Yeah, we have conversations about fuzzy tunes, the boundaries of tunes being sort of fuzzy, because, well, if it has 3 parts but not the 4th part, is it the same tune? When does a tune become a different tune? How do we define the tune? We have genre boundaries, dance genre boundaries and listening boundaries, genre boundaries, all fuzzy, overlapping. And then we have, the what is in and what is out boundaries. And we try to think about those. We had a part of our team meeting in the winter was called Teddy Talk, because it was about fuzzy things. So that's Matthew's. And this fuzzy, Matthew actually, hope his ears are not burning too much, because I want to say something that he mentioned, that he summarized something very nicely that I really appreciated. Oh gosh, and where is it? It's capturing that our work on the fuzzy questions is the attempt to capture the complexity of ambiguity. Right, the complexity of ambiguity, and that's a challenge, right? So I'm going to hand it over to Jonathan Malin, who is tuning in from Boulder, Colorado, and he's going to talk about corpus studies a little bit, and other things that he wants to talk about. I want to start spinning out some of the visions that we have for what this tool might look like, while we continue on talking to everybody who's on the team. So.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you all for being here. Yeah, so I'm a music theorist. I'm at the University of Colorado Boulder. I also am a flautist and love playing this music as well. And so, corpus studies overlaps with computational musicology in some ways. It doesn't necessarily overlap, but I thought a nice way to a nice entry into this might be, if you're thinking of what Eleanor just presented in terms of the network, or starting with a tune, right? The tune is an individual kind of entity or whatever it is. Corpus studies kind of takes the other approach. Rather than the single tune, it takes a whole body of tunes all together and says, what can we say about this body of tunes? Whether it's Berezovsky's instrumental volume, whether it's Berezovsky's Nigun volume, whether it's another, the Kostkowski collection, or, another collection. What can we say about this collection as a whole? And so that's some of the questions that I think this archive needs to be prepared to provide materials for. Not that we need to answer those questions, but I think we want to provide materials for people doing corpus studies to be able to ask those questions and answer those questions. So I'm involved in some of this research myself, working right now mainly with the Berezovsky volume. And just to give you a little window in it, there's kind of two kinds of searches we're doing. One is a directed search, where we say, okay, there's this little pattern, there's this idiom, right? Or sometimes it's known as a schema. Where does this happen? And so this is what Matthew was talking about. Rather than us going tune by tune saying, is this in this tune, is this in this tune, we can do a search, right? That's a directed search, which is not always as simple as it seems, but it can be done. Then there's the undirected searches, where we just say, okay, if we look at all the material, all the tunes that are in Fragish, what's the distribution of pitches in those tunes? And then that tells us something in a very kind of broad way about the mode. You have to interact with it, and with your own intuition and say, what is it actually telling us? And so there's always a dialogue between, intuition and what the computation is telling us. And so, that's kind of what the corpus studies involves broadly. The main thing in terms of this project is we're doing a kind of literature review, what's being done in corpus studies, and how can that inform how this archive is put together? So.
Thanks, Jonathan. One of Jonathan's colleagues, Dan Shanahan, they work very closely together, and he wrote to us something that we didn't know, which is that of the digitized the quantity of digitized corpuses, corpora, thank you. The majority of them are based in Western classical music, or not the majority, but there are some. I think there's a Native American song corpus that has been digitally, included, but there are very few, if any. You can correct me what it is, how it is exactly on the ton, but corpora that deal with music of oral tradition. And so by working on Berezovsky and our corpus specifically as the first level of our work is the Kisselhoff material, that we have the potential to really very measurably have an impact on the field of corpus studies by providing an alternative to the Western classical music that is the basis of so much other research. So yeah. Is that right, Jonathan? Did I get that
Yeah,
right?
but just to add for perspective, and the other thing is a slightly different point, but for those who know Joel Rubin's work, that is very rigorous corpus studies based on the Naftali Brandwein and Dave Terrace repertoire, recorded repertoire from the 1920s. Really incredible achievement, all done by hand. And so that's it's an interesting model, and it's definitely something we want to build on. We're not trying to do this from scratch. But that's an example where you can do corpus studies by hand and you can do great work that way, or you can try to do it computationally as well. Sorry about the noise in the background.
That's okay. That's great. Thanks, Jonathan. So I'm going to turn over to Matthew in just a minute. But before we get there, like Jonathan has now described for us one kind of user, which is sort of the researcher who's working in corpus studies, and maybe somebody who's involved in computational musical analysis of different varieties. We're hoping to attract, historians and musicologists of all stripes, academic and non-academic, which is what you might expect from a digital archival resource. But as the place that we started, you as consumers, you are also one of the primary audiences for this archival tool. And so the mental mapping interviews and the networker experiments are ways for us to understand how working musicians, practical musicians, not only how we think about music, but if you were to go to the tool, what do you need it to do for you? Right? What are you interested in finding out about the music when you were to go? We want you to want to come here to visit. And so that's our research is trying to figure those things out. So if you have thoughts, we are open and welcome to hearing from you. We're always going to be looking for feedback on those topics. One of the most sort of evocative images, we've got a couple of the images I want to spin out for you. And one is, the first place is the traditional, so we call it the traditional archival metadata, where you would have an item, an individual item, which is an instance or an iteration of a tune, whether it be printed, recorded, live performance, so on. And you would have your basic catalog information about that item, right? Another way that we want to express this information about this tune is what, in a way that I sort of described, which is that you would have perhaps an image of the original manuscript source of the piece item of music. You might have a computationally rendered digital notation, like sheet music version of the tune. You might have below it a pitch map or some kind of another expression of the music in a digital format, and that would be useful. When you could play it as a MIDI, to be able to hear that pitch map as a MIDI tune that kind of produces automatically, as well as links to recorded examples if they exist. And so that makes it on the level of music we hope quite useful. Another search feature should be that you are able to search by typing in the tune, doing what's that service called? Where there's a little keyboard where you could type in the beginning of the melody. Yeah, something like a tune finder, or that Hymnody, what's it called? Hymnody has this. Hymnody is a great, Clara, do you want to talk about Hymnody and talk about that?
Well, it's, I think it's Hymnary.
Hymnary, that's correct, that's right.
I think, which is essentially a tool that holds all of the hymns that you could pretty much think of, and you can search it by lyric, you can search it by resource, you can search it by entering the melody. So very much parallel in that component. So
yeah, because if you come to the archive and you don't know the name of the tune, and you don't know, you might not even remember who recorded it, but you remember the melody of the tune, it's essential that you be able to search on that tune fragment and have tunes turn up for you. So those are things, these are all technologies that exist. All of these technologies are currently technologies that exist in the world, and our job is to combine them all together. The additive component is the ability to hold commentary by community members on individual items in a space that is co-located with the record of the tune. And one of the ways that I've been envisioning this is like almost, I call it the Talmudic approach, the Talmudic display. In a Wikipedia article, you have a single source, you have a single narrative, right? And so that article ideally has, one narrative. You read the article and you know that it is being edited by people behind the scenes, but when you go to consume the article itself, you don't see the contributors per se. It's either one way or it's another way, and you have to dig into it to see the discussion that's going on in the background. But in Jewish tradition, you can have a text, and then you have commentary on the text. You have location material where it is, and then you can have competing narratives or different kinds of commentary about the item itself. In our case, the text is the music, right? The text is the piece of music. And then if somebody says, well, I believe that this tune has an origin from here and there and so like this, and then somebody else with has an authority, has a saying, well, the melodic structure of this tune is very similar to another item, that those two things, even if they slightly disagree with each other, might be able to be co-located with that item if you're looking at the commentary section. And I think that that's a feature that we're very interested in trying to create, and also to curate, because we want to make sure that the commentary that's visible, we don't want to exclude commentary. We also want to be able to weight commentary so that more experienced users, more experienced practitioners, and culture bearers is the technical term, get more weight in the the task, or in the vision there. So that's kind of the community-centered vision, or the community-centered space that goes around these tunes, because this is how we often work together, sort of, and that makes that those conversations that happen in private is a way to make them visible to a larger community. So I'm gonna turn the microphone over to Max now to have him talk about some of the things that he's interested in, he's working on. And Max is another one of our tech team. Max is a fantastic klezmer violinist, and I'm going to let you speak for yourself.
Thank you. So yeah, as Christina said, I'm a klezmer violinist. I'm also, I write software by trade, and I'm a very poor accordionist. I came to this, as Matthew said earlier, I came to this, I was the person who approached Christina and Matthew on the street. My interest initially was, there's a bunch of tunes that I know in my head, but anytime I was in a jam, I would forget, like somebody would be like, call a tune, I'm like, which one? So, I was trying to use the tools I had, and I knew how to build in software to organize what was in my head better. And in a way, this is just a bigger, more complex version of that, that's intending to cater to more different types of users. One of our goals has been to attempt to model all of the information that's in every expert's head. We want to democratize klezmer information, or Yiddish information, to make it so you don't have to, you don't have to make an appointment with an expert to consult the expert. The expert's information is available to everyone, and it's available to a computer. And that computer can look at all of that information in all one place and find patterns that we might not be able to otherwise. I wanted to talk a little bit, when we were showing off the networker, there were some questions about databases. And I wanted to talk a little bit about how our approach is a little bit different than what you might have heard of. So in both traditional relational databases and in traditional library or archival systems, there's a notion of a fixed schema where it's like there are fields out an item, and you have to put a value in for those fields. So the item has a name, it has an author, it has a date. As these things they're there or they're not. That you can't have. There's no flexibility there. Whereas here's a tune. What is its name? Well, which source? Well, it has this name over here, and this name over here, and this name over here, and this name over here. So when was it created? Well, we think around 1870 maybe, but we're not sure. So incorporating this kinds of we're not sure or multiple yes, yes, and types of information is part of why we're investigating other kinds of ways of modeling this data. And the approach that we're quickly converging on is what's called knowledge graphs, which is almost like if you've ever done a mental mapping exercise. You start with like a bubble in the middle and you connect it to another idea and you connect it to another idea and you connect it to another idea. So instead of having a field that you have to fill, you have facts that you can add on to an item. So you can say, this tune has this name in this region. This tune has this name in this region, but only between these dates. And you just keep adding facts and adding facts. And pretty soon you have all of the, you can add, once you've added all the facts, you have all the facts. The flip side of that is now you need to figure out how to retrieve those facts from the system. So that's an entire domain in and of itself. What else did I want to talk about? There was another topic, and now I am blanking. While
you're blanking, I'm gonna make you some time, give you some time. Nope. So you think of the thing that you were thinking of, and I'm gonna connect the networker experiments and this sort of knowledge graph, this sort of like aggregation of facts to some of the some of the library research we're doing now. We've been doing networker experiments and we're trying to be expansive. And one of the next things that we're going to be doing is trying to retrofit our networker work and these expansive fact lists back into the Dublin core, which is a standard, sort of standard taxonomy, so that we can figure out how much of Dublin core we can use, or how far we can get with those tools. And if we can do everything with those tools, Yahtzee, great. And if we can't, then we'll have a sense of like, what are the locations, what are the places, what are the areas where the Dublin core and its sort of related things don't serve our needs. Because there's a tension that Max and some of our tech team has talked about between using existing resources and stretching them and adapting them to fit your needs, and then building completely from scratch. There are benefits and drawbacks to both. There's strong, there's a lot of reason to go with extensible tools that already exist to the extent that you can. But I'm going to throw that ball back into your court, Max, because you talk about that a lot.
So I remember that I wanted to clarify a little bit more the role of the networker in the project. So just because the data model we're investigating is more flexible than a traditional sort of table-based system, doesn't mean that it doesn't have a structure. It just has a more complex structure. So to be able to retrieve information from any data store, that data needs to be organized in a regular way. By regular, I mean like it has a well-known structure, a knowable structure, which is typically in the industry referred to as a schema. So because we're using a more complex data storage mechanism, we're also going to be using the schema itself is going to be more complex. Schema playing is going to be more complex than it would be with a traditional table-based system. So our goal with the networker is to start to think about how we could model facts, because in certain cases there are multiple conflicting approaches, or there might be approaches that would lock us off from modeling other kinds of facts. Like for example, if you model tune name in a way that doesn't allow you to model the context in which that name occurs, you're going to run into trouble. Like you can have two of them, but what if they're not both valid all of the time? What if they're only valid under certain contexts? So we're trying to, one of the principles that we're using when building this project is iterative development. We're not going to try to, go into an ivory tower and labor for seven days and 7 nights, 7 years and 7 whatever, and then bring out this tool fully formed. We're going to take one step and then take another step and then take another step and so on until we get closer and closer and closer to where do we want to be. So, our first step right now, as part of the KMDMP project, is to just digitize tunes and start to deal with, okay, well, what does it mean to create a standardized digitization of a tune, of a manuscript, specifically of a manuscript? And then when we do the networker stuff, we're thinking about, okay, well, how do we think about modeling this information? What are different ways we could approach it? What are the trade-offs between them? Because in doing that, we'll learn something that we didn't know before, and we can carry that information forward to the next step. I think this is going to be a big theme in the project, because we're not going to be finished after the 2-year grant is finished. And even if we get the next stage grant after that, we probably won't be finished after that. Like, this project is going to be, even when it's done, there's going to be more to do. And we'll only iteratively get closer and closer to that sort of like North Star that we want to arrive at.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Max. That's a great, great way to sort of summarize the work, the way that we're approaching the work. And we're right about an hour into this conversation. So I'd like to open the floor to questions, because I know we have lots of friends here. Well, you're all friends here because you're here, and so we thank you for being here. I saw Bob Blacksburg raised his hand, and I'm looking at the screen, so you can either raise your hand, you can put a question in the chat, and we'll try to go through them one by one. Bob, do you want to go ahead and
Sure.
unmute yourself?
I did unmute myself. I hope you can hear me. I want to offer a number of observations, partly from working in this, partly from my work in law practice and law practice technology, which I think actually has some parallels and lessons for this. So first of all, we haven't talked about the kind of musical archaeology experience that we're having working with the Kislegoff manuscripts. And there's a major part of those of us who've been touching it have been time traveling to 1911 to 1913 and kind of experiencing firsthand the musical experience that we've kind of experienced indirectly, mediated by the work of people like Berezovsky, and having the direct experience with that. And that's a whole aspect of it that's not really part of the cataloging, but certainly part of what we're experiencing. Secondly, I would suggest we will never finish. Okay, first, the human brain has capabilities of association that are so much beyond any model that we have for them yet. I mean, we have some interesting models in machine learning that seem to get into, seem to help us escape some of the constraints that happen when we try to reduce association to these relatively simple mathematical tools. And a database, a relational database, is actually quite a simple mathematical tool compared to machine learning algorithms, which work in multiple dimensions and have capabilities behind that. But the brain does it better, and does it vastly better. So to the lawyer part of this, lawyers have been using document management systems now for about 30 years. And the taxonomy issues and those kind of things that are part of lawyers trying to organize their materials end up being reduced to each person figures it out for themselves. You attempt to build a taxonomy, but the real experience is that each practitioner finds a path and their own mental map for traveling through the content. And and so I think we have to be aware that something like that is going to happen here, that we're going to come at it from many mental maps and many experiences, so that I think that needs to be taken into account. And then a last throwaway is that I think faceted search is absolutely fascinating. Faceted search, if you know what I mean, I'm not going to try to explain it at the moment, but the ability to see the search results that have a machine generated breakdown. You experience this on Amazon when you see people like this bought other things or brands or other things like that. And I think that it opens up a flexible way of looking at content that's not just a taxonomy. So there's
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, that's great. I think you hit it right on the head. I mean, I think you've stated some things that I think we learned a little bit in our first visioning exercise, and I think Skylar's ask for us to do that work really helped us crystallize this. That in fact, yes, everybody has a different mental map and we want to make sure that we have a flexible, we have enough of a robust search and enough ways for people to engage with the material that they can find their own way. We don't want to predict ahead of time what somebody wants. We want to let them find their way. And with the exception that the probably the most heavily curated part of the tool, in fact, might be the Klezmer for newcomers, the onboarding experience for newcomers to the music, because there you want to give people a way in that facilitates a newcomer, either who is a newcomer to music, period, or who is an experienced musician who is new to this kind of music. And so I think there's a space for a lot of thought to go into that particular corner, so that you can get people into the tool and then give them things to chew on and then turn them loose as they become more and more engaged. Does that comport with your thinking? I see you nodding your head, Skylar.
Yeah, I think this brings up a really great point also about when we're talking about mental mapping and the sort of research that goes into how people use a product. There's a couple different phases and ways in which we incorporate that. So right now, as we're kind of learning from the beginning and learning how people navigate and conceptualize these things kind of in general outside of a product, that's sort of what we call generative or discovery phase research. And then as we go through this sort of iterative design process, we'll learn about how people use the resource as well, and that's called validative research. So we can kind of have that constant exchange of ideas and feedback with users as well to see, oh, I presented you with something that I built you. How do you actually use it? How does that jive with how I expected you to use it? Is there something there? Probably there is, that we didn't expect, and how can we work to better support that?
I wanted to add a thought since you mentioned search, Dan, and I've been thinking about this recently, or Bob's, I'm sorry, recently I've been thinking about search as I've been reading some papers on different types of music search, like searching based on text of music. And it has occurred to me that our first challenge probably is not going to be to build the search, but to figure out how to measure search, how to measure the effectiveness of a searching algorithm or of a composition of searching algorithms. Once we solve that, then we can test out lots of different approaches to search, and we'll take that iterative process and see which works best for us. Faceted search might be in there, other approaches might be in there too, but challenge number one is figure out what makes a search good, and that's kind of the stage that we're in right now in a lot of things. Is we're just that like first step out of the spaceship, trying to figure out how much we're going to bounce.
Fantastic. I see Ilana has her hand up, so I'll call on you next, and then I see Michelle Buzinski and I see Dan Karkner there. So why don't you go ahead, Ilana?
I feel like I missed a step somewhere. So I guess my question is, how do the digitalizations that have already been done match up with the search facility that you're talking about? For example, are they all in the right format for you to be able to run a search facility on? Are we where are we with that, as opposed to the sort of higher level, all the functionality that there's going to be mapping to the actual work that's being done with notes, written notes?
Great. I'm going to answer in one way, and then I'm going to hand that back to Max. Max has other answers, and I'm going to give you one answer that will not satisfy you, and then Max will give you an answer that will, I don't know if it will satisfy you or not. The unsatisfactory answer I'm going to give you is that the NEH grants that we're in is, at the end of the 2 years, we are going to have a plan for the tool, and a plan for the minimum viable products. What are the minimum things that our tool needs to have on a technological level that are going to be mushed all together to create the core features that we have identified that will make our tool work the way we want it to, according to our mission. So, and then after that, after this end of that grant, we'll be applying to actually build prototypes. So that's a way of me saying that the work that we're doing in Kisselhoff right now is rather a long way from being realized in Search. That said, we're thinking about ways that we can do some things that will make everybody's life more satisfied, because we all want this like yesterday. So I'm turning over to Max to talk about that.
Sure. So I'm going to answer the question possibly also unsatisfyingly by saying both yes and no, which seems like it's a common theme for this day. So part of why we've been asking people to submit native files and music XML and PDFs is that the PDFs are not machine readable, really, but the music XML and possibly the native files are. So we could build some kinds of rudimentary search now. In fact, that's something we're actually thinking about pretty soon, is just to have some very basic note search to be like, has this tune already been transcribed? Or are there 2 copies of this tune in the archive somewhere? We don't know. So those kinds of tools would be fairly straightforward to build. In fact, I already halfway built one. But the no part is, while the tunes have been, have been transcribed, we haven't undertaken a serious standardization effort yet, which is going to be necessary to make sure that when people try to search for something, they get back what they expect. So I would say that we're making progress in that direction, and we're not going to lose any of the work that we've already done. We're going to have to redo everything. But again, we're still only at the first step.
And then there'll be an editorial pass probably before we go on to the Max has a thing. What do we call that thing? Like the incipit tool, or this basic music search tool. We do need to run a bit of a editorial pass, and that's just looking at the tunes we have already, making a pass on them. It can also be a team effort, and before we dump them into this tool. Because we've learned the hard way that Max and I have been spending very considerable amount of time trying to automate our score intake process, and we've learned a lot of things along the way, and it's been awesome, but boy, did it take a long time. So we want to try to get some of the things right from the beginning. We found that to be helpful. So I'm going to call on Michelle, and then Dan Karkner, and then Eliana Bressler and Ilya. I see you all there. So go ahead, Michelle.
Yeah, hi. I'm sorry I cannot set the video on for some reason, so I'm just talking. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. So I wanted to react to things that Max said, which I find really very interesting, and has a lot to do with the kind of thing that I've been doing. One thing first is the last thing you said, Max, about standards. What's interesting is that topic maps, which is the thing on which the networker is basically inspired from, came from another standard at the beginning called SMDL, standing for Standard Music Description Language, which was a standard that never was published, but was an attempt in the late 1980s. So this is very old, but it eventually came into a standard called High Time. High Time became several things, including topic maps. And so that's one thing about the history of where it comes from. So it's interesting to see that these problems still, the standardization problem are still on. The other thing I wanted to say about that is that when we were designing the topic map standard, it was at the same time as RDF, which became the foundation for the semantic web, Dublin Core, etc. The difference in the perspective was that topic map was built on the human representation of knowledge, whereas RDF was built on the potential for machine processing. And there was 2 different angles to how you describe information and how you put them in a graph, which explains why for me, it gives some light about the still ongoing discussion about the part of the human, curation and description of information as opposed to what you can do with machine learning and AI. And so this is kind of a, historical perspective. There will be a lot more to say about that, but just as a introduction to that. The other thing I wanted to say on a very practical level is that what Max said about we need to record facts. You can already do that with the networker using a facility that you may not have seen yet, which is the fact that every relationship can be considered a topic per se as well. So if you say, I don't know, this tune has been performed by this, musician, this itself is a topic. So you may want to say, oh yes, by the way, I have seen another performance of the same tune in another place or whatever. So just practically speaking, if you go to the networker and you go to the discover menu, the last option is relations as topic. So you will discover that every relationship you've already created is itself a topic. So you can relate it to something else as well. Like the period or the, validity or, so you may be able to go a little bit further than just, putting things by topics, but it's like topics of topics. And so basically that's, there's a lot else I want to say, but I think I will stop for now
And we're looking forward to talking to you soon as we get more experienced on the networker, because we have questions and we want to hang out with you and talk about them. But we have a few more experiments we want to run before we get there, because we're still exploring a lot and we love it. So I'm gonna, let's see, I think Dan Karkner, were you up next, or why don't you go next?
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me clearly?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, great presentation. And my question is kind of a niche one, but so obviously you have several violinists on your technical team already. So I'm sure you've thought about this, but what you showed so far of the mapping of concepts and the way that tunes are mapped digitally, it wouldn't really represent the side of klezmer music of ornaments and tone and like the specific way of how something is interpreted. So I'm just curious if any of you have thought of how that will be captured eventually, just in adding terms of description, or what else is there? That's all what I'm curious about technically or whatever.
That is the best question. Thank you so much. Anybody have thoughts about that? I think we haven't, I don't know that we've explicitly considered that, but gosh, are we going to?
Well, from my perspective, making sure that we take care to involve not just in our project team, but also in the folks that we're talking to in our research about what is needed, how this is going to be used, folks from a variety of instrumental backgrounds. And it has, I know, in our conversations when we're listing who we want to reach out to, has been discussed that we need to take care to involve violinists as well due to underrepresentation.
I'm going to throw in my 2 cents, which is that one of the things that we've talked a lot about when building this is how our goal is to provide context. We don't want to present information in a vacuum. We're just going to give you the score and say, have fun, right? We're going to, have all of the information around it, and we're going to have a recording, like as much context as we can provide, we want to provide. Ornaments are interesting because they, do you have a precise taxonomy of violin ornaments in Klezmer written down somewhere? Because I would love to see it. I'm not aware of that such a thing exists. It's very context dependent. And so to me, that's a generalization of that question is, how do you provide context for written works? Which is a thing that we are thinking about. We're initially focused on the digitizing manuscripts, but we are all looking forward to the day when we are far enough along with that we can also focus on recordings as well. I think that'll be an important way we can add context. And I think we're also going to look for other ways we can add context prior to that.
I think that also speaks a little bit to the sort of beginner, like no calling it the beginner, but like the intake process too, like curating that part of the content, which is to say, if you're interested in hearing violin performance in the early 20th century, here is a curated list of like 5 or 6 recordings that you can listen to for reference as you then go explore these written manuscripts. And if you want to hear contemporary violinists performing in a traditional style, here is a selection of 5 or 6 or 10 contemporary violinists, in our times or in the revival period or post-revival period that you could listen to for examples, and that's part of like, that wouldn't necessarily attach to every single item, but would be available as like a general resource that could be pointed to. Now that's of course is contentious, and who gets to make those decisions, and we'll cross that bridge when we get there, but you can be sure that we're going to be having those discussions inside of these rooms, for sure. So yes, Hankus?
Well, are you sure that you want to have those discussions inside of these rooms? Because I mean, it's an archive. I think the point of an archive is, I mean, I don't know. I would just say that I look to an archive for some sort of version of something that is somewhat accepted. And then
Sure.
you use that as a point of departure to do whatever you want with. But if you start getting into, in other words, and in a museum exhibit, I will also show lots of, right. And I will also show lots of versions of something because you use it as a point of departure and you can do many things with it. But is that the role of the archive is the question. I mean, in other words, that might be the role of some sort of, I'm just asking. I mean, I'm just wondering because you're talking about a digital archive, not a, I mean, it would seem that once you open up that can of worms, it just seems like it goes maybe beyond the purpose, but maybe not. I don't really know.
One of our first
point.
This is a very interesting topic. One of our first, but I think that speaks to this, one of these first principles that we spoke about is the role of outreach.
Okay.
Like if you go to the library and you want a children's book, like, there's, maybe there's like 5 or 6 books on the top of the bookcase that are like the latest offerings or these kinds of things, so when we're talking about being a place where we can bring in newcomers into the genre, there is a huge role, I think, for certain kinds of curated experiences that will help to bring in new people. I mean, one of the problems that I think that, well, we can have this discussion, but like, classical musician, classical violinist comes and they're like, oh, Klezmer, sounds interesting. Well, where can I buy a book that has all the violin pieces? And I'm like, well, it doesn't exist. Well, where can I listen to the great violin solos? Well, you write off and you can buy some cassettes, or you can listen to a lot of brass band recordings, or you can listen, you have to go look in, you can go take your luck in the various archival collections. But if you go to the Mayrent collection, for example, as one of the best, it is one of the best that we have right now. It is totally open, but there is no curated onboarding intake experience there. Like if you don't know the names of the violin performers, you don't know where to search for them. And so it's really just potluck. So if we're designing part of this archival tool to be a means of outreach into communities that are not yet aware of this music, then we want to be creating those small exhibitions in these small places. And if you go to Europeana, if you go to any of these big digital humanities projects, Scribes of the Geniza, all of these things, they have an onboarding experience that helps you get into the process. They have things that you can look at that are highlighted and chosen for you. And then you can go on and use the tool as you think. So I do think there's a role for that. And when I say we'll be in these rooms, we'll be here, but like when we have this list, did we forget anybody? Did we forget, we want to make sure that we're not overlooking people who should be included in various resources. So, I mean, it's not to say that we aren't going to curate, because we're going to, editing is a thing that happens.
this for a second? Yeah, I'm reading all the comments about how to define archives here, and they're really interesting questions. They're kind of how I orient my whole PhD dissertation on the history of the YIVO Sound Archive, and the way I've looked at it, and I think the way we've decided to look at the Klezmer Archive, this project, and more broadly, our music archives is as a living space. So, which is also why we're looking at those different scales. I mean, my background is in geography, and so this is how I was trained to look at things. But so the idea of looking at the corpus and also at the individual tunes and like shift between those approaches is important to also make sense of what we have in front of you. And the archive as a living space, like to take the example of the YIVO Sound Archive, it was created as klezmer musicians or aspiring klezmer musicians were looking to revive the music. So there was a direct living process going on there. And I feel like it's still ongoing. And so this is what we're trying to do as part of that. So there's a constant conversation going on between the users of the archives and what there is to find there. So yeah.
Totally. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. This is a great topic of conversation. We're going to wrap up very soon, but we have Ilya and Eliana, both who have their hands up. So Eliana, do you want to go first with your question?
Okay. First of all, I want to thank you all for doing this. This is like phenomenal. I also want to say I'm representing my husband, so to speak, who's in another meeting. And it's sort of ironic because I am as unmusical as possible. I actually have a serious major learning disability in music. I can't remember notes. It's like I'm useless in that department. But as music support, I've also learned a lot, and I come with a different perspective on what you're doing. So the first one, the last question I thought was really great. The I forget what you call it, but the tweaks on how exactly you put your emotion into the sheet of music, which is a huge part of klezmer. And that I can tell. And I just, as somebody who is easily overwhelmed by things, I know that this is not my genre, so it would be overwhelming to start with, but I really want to caution you all to not tangle yourself up in so many layers that it becomes unworkable. When I saw that thing with all the connections, I'm just picturing you're going to get a spider web on top of a spider web and somebody puts their foot in it and they can't leave. And also computers, no matter how powerful they are, have their limits and they crash. And it really is bad news. So I would actually suggest this last question that there might be I don't know how you decided, but like a semi-separate aspect of your website, which is overviews of what makes klezmer, how you put the emotion in. I mean, I overhear more in the place we used to live, my husband teaching music, and he has had classical musicians come and want to learn how to play klezmer. And I hear him trying to describe how, it comes from your kishkis. They don't know what a kishki is. I mean, it's another language, but there is a way to describe some of that. And you would need a number of different people who play different instruments doing this kind of thing. And then they could give examples and link to songs that are in the archive, but you wouldn't be overwhelmed by like hitting one song and having to know, because a lot of that stuff, I mean, yes, it's unique to different songs, but there's a commonality. You can listen. I also, with my music disability, I can hear a piece of klezmer music and say, oh, that's Andy, because he does it a certain way. And that's a common thread. And that doesn't have to be identified on every song, I wouldn't think, if it's going to make everything more complicated. So quickly, the original question, which was the perspective I brought up once before, is about copyright ownership, respecting the musicians' versions of it. We did a CD, and my husband was lucky. I think it was Mr. Goldenstern, who did something my husband wanted to play. And Andy knew somebody who knew somebody who knew the nephew, and we were able to track him down and get permission. but it would be a good thing to be able to at least identify, or co-writers, or even people who are arguing over who owns the song, to or songs that are in the tradition copyright expired, and you know it for sure, and you're not nervous about what's going to happen. Because I just took a workshop on copyright, and some of it's pretty serious business.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
especially if it's owned by one of those nasty music companies. So that I would hope, you know, as a potential user of this service, I would hope that that would be in there somewhere, and maybe also a separate page, which is sort of an overview of coping with permission to play something and copy people's particular embellishments, etc.
Right.
Anyway, thank you so much for doing this, and I'll tell Fischl this was recorded so he can listen to it.
Absolutely. I thank you. So nice to see you. Actually, I haven't seen you in a long time. It's great to see you. But yeah, that's a great question. I mean, one of the reasons that we're working with as our sort of initial test corpus with this Kisselhoff material is that it's 100% super sure, totally in the public domain. The music contained in those manuscripts is public domain. It's before 1923. So by even the more rigorous American standards, it's like really just out of copyright. Another thing is that as we would seek to incorporate other kinds of materials, copyright, of course, becomes an issue. But we can also say that if we might say that, you know, we know that, like, Fischl Bressler's ensemble recorded, you know, this melody, you know, on this date under this label with these other people. We could list all of the discographical information about the item without necessarily having the item that you could listen to in that archive space, right? But we could provide a link to where you might be able to hear that if it's available in a publicly listenable space, or where you might be able to purchase that disc, right? So there's the difference between the bibliographical reference or the discographical reference as opposed to the item itself, right? So we may not hold, I mean, we're not a physical place. This isn't a physical place, so we won't have stacks of discs in the back, but we hopefully be able to point to other places. And one of the things that we'd like to be able to do further down the road is connect with other institutional archives so that we don't hold their collections, but we can link to their collections and describe their collections with some of our more Klezmer specific, domain specific metadata things that make it more searchable in the way that, like, you know, in the way that we're envisioning. But it's a little bit further down the road for us, but that's certainly something we're thinking about. And so Ilya, thank you for being so patient for listening to that. Max, did you have something? Yeah.
One small thing, which is that when possible, we are also favoring open licenses as much as possible. So, for example, all of the photocopies of the KMDMP material are available under a Creative Commons attribution license. All of the source code for any software rewrite will be available as open source, since this is a grant-funded project. It belongs to the people, and it also the tool belongs to the community. So we will deal with potential licensing issues that are definitely front of mind, and we will deal with them as they come up. But also, as much as possible, we want this to be open and free for everyone.
That's right. Thank you. Carl Fogel, who was actually an expert in this, and if you are interested in copyright issues and open source issues, like, I recommend you to Carl's website, which I can offline with you about, but he writes in the chat, and I'm saying it for the purposes of the video, that, and actually, Carl, do you want to just say what you just wrote? Why am I reading your stuff? You can say what you said.
I'll try to say it in less chat formal language. Basically, there's a tendency to confuse copyright with attribution issues, like so-and-so made this particular passage or ornament style or whatever. That often you find that who holds the copyright on a work, especially in classical music, is not the person who was the author anyway. It's often a publisher. But in any case, copyright is not about attribution and crediting. It is about legal monopolies on copying things and distributing them and performing them to some extent. So I would just urge us all to keep those two things distinct in our minds. because whether you're crediting someone accurately, like that's a good practice to have, and you're avoiding the implication that you wrote a thing you didn't write, et cetera. It's just good manners. The question of whether things are in copyright or not is often quite fraught, and you can always credit accurately independently of whether you're claiming something is in the public domain. I'm very skeptical about the usefulness of copyright to musicians in general, but that does not have to be a topic for the Klezmer Archive, but please don't conflate those two things. Crediting is one thing, distribution is another.
Absolutely. Great. So, and thank you very much for clarifying that for the record. And now I want to turn our final question over to Ilya, who has been so patiently waiting to ask. So thank you for being patient. And what you got?
Thank you so much. Do you hear me?
Yes.
First of all, thanks to all. That's a great job done and a great project. If I would have to be helpful or to contribute by some way, I'll be happy. I'm a musician, I'm a flute player playing klezmer. Also, I'm a mathematician. And I wrote two papers, one by myself, one with Zhenya Hasdan, who is here with us, on the corpus, corpus of traditional music subject, one of Greek music, one of klezmer music. One is published, one is to be published in September. If it would be interesting, we can share this and talk about this topic. Some of topics that were talked about today, I'm touching in these papers. So that's the first and the second. Thank you all, and it's a great job. The points I have and the questions I have is that, first of all, the very lower level is what the piece of material that was recorded or published or written as a manuscript. Am I right? Is it so in an archive? That's the first question. Or the lowest level is some, for example, Russian share that consists of versions recorded or published. Which one? What is the actual situation? Tell me, please.
So the answer to that question is yes. And I know that is not a satisfying answer. But this really speaks to our idea of fuzzy things and overlapping categories, because we have and in our networker experiment, we spent a lot of time on Russian share because it is like a tune family, a family of tunes that are referred to sort of colloquially as the Russian share. Boundaries slightly undefined, but of which there are several different iterations, some of which are called Russian share, some of which are also called by their name of Russian share, and some of which have completely different names, but which are referred to in this tune family. So the unit of one of the most basic units of the archive, the digital archive space, will be, I think, and anybody who wants to correct me on this, please jump in, it would be an item, right? An item being a particular expression of a melody. And we learned this, quite a bit about this in a conversation we had with Jean Delahousse, who is the creator, one of the main creators of the Do Re Mus project. And this was a way that they were marrying three giant French sound archives together. And it was just like it's a super sort of way of linking all of those archives together. And so the item itself, the smallest unit of the archive is an item. So we can say Russian share is a general tune family, which is comprised of this specific recording that was made on gramophone by this ensemble in this place on this date. So that is an item. It is an individual expression of this concept of Russian share, right? And then we have a second, say we have a second expression of Russian share, which was recorded by a different orchestra in a different place on a different date, and which shares three of the parts that are in this other version, and has one part that is shared also with two other versions that were recorded on different dates in different places and found in different books and so on. So we're going to be able to have this sort of family relationship, but also individual expressions that relate to this manuscript, this performance, and so like this. Does that make sense? And did I get that right, everybody?
Thank you so much. That's great. Good. The next question is, there are not so much of it, just two or three. The next question is about dance and horology. Because, for example, in this fuzzy linking, there is a dimension of the dance that's danced to that particular melody, or and it's not one-to-one, it's many-to-many, if you understand what I mean.
Yep, absolutely.
Yes, and so if it's not so easy situation, because most of dance information that's written in Bergovsky, Stuchevsky, and so on sources is related not to concrete recording, not to concrete item, but to family of items. It's not so easy to fix such relation on a very basic ground. But is this dimension listed in the possibilities of your archive? That's the second question.
It's essential. It's essential. And this is because, of course, not all of klezmer music, for example, as identified by Bergovsky, is dance music, but a huge amount of the music is dance music. There's also music for listening. But so let's look at music for dancing for a moment. And as you say, this is complex, because if it's titled as Skochna, but it has the form of Frelix, right? And so what do there is no dance called Skochna. There are different versions, and also there is no singular dance of Frelix either. It can be a solo dance danced by a male person. It can be a solo dance danced by a female person, in which the expression might also be different. It may also be a dance that is danced by a number of people all together in either segregated genders or in mixed couples. So, we have all kinds of different things that have to do with dance that are not without complications. Now, how we deal with that not entirely sure. But we are definitely thinking about it. And that kind of complexity is really, really important to, this is like, as this wonderful phrase from Matthew, is capturing the complexity of ambiguity, right? Because ambiguity is important, and you don't want to collapse ambiguity into one singular narrative,
There will be more complexity if we are talking about sharing, shared repertoire, and, for example, question if this particular melody that's shared between Ukrainian and Jews is danced in a similar manner somewhere, sometimes. Just this question is not so easy. Okay, thank you so much. I'm over.
That's great. Well, thank you so much. Since we have Henkes is here, Henkes's work is also like extremely interesting in this respect. If we're looking at the Philly shares, as Henkes so beautifully documents in his book, there's this version in 1911 that has this many parts, and then the later version has overlapping but different sets of parts, and then the version from 1967 has this many parts and this many sections. They're all, are they all the Philly share? Well, sure, but they're different things in different times, so they're sort of complex in different dimensions, and they point us to different cultural contexts, and making sure that we account for that in a way that is meaningful and apprehendable is really important to us. So great. Anybody have? Yeah, go ahead, Clara.
So hi everybody, I'm Clara. I'm also on the project team, and I am development director for the Klezmer Institute. you might be wondering, okay, this is awesome. What can I do? And this is the short list. First of all, thank you for being here, and please reach out and ask us questions, ask us for clarifications. We want to talk to any one of you that is interested in this project. So that's first things first. info@klezmerinstitute.org. If you know people who weren't here who want to know about this, who would be interested in this, which is hopefully a lot of people, please let them know about our work. We have a page up on our website now, and there's a blog forthcoming, and of course a whole website of its own in due time. So please share our information with them. Let them know they can also reach out directly with us. As we've mentioned, we are honored to have received an NEH grant for the first 2 years of this work. Even with that funding, our team, our incredible, awesome team, is donating tons of time and energy. And so if you know someone who is interested in supporting our work financially, again, connect them with us. We are happy to follow up. If you want to, introduce us and join us for a conversation, we'd be grateful, but whatever is comfortable for you. And we are continuing to apply for grants and all of that. But your help in that way would be immensely appreciated. So thank you so much for joining us, and I'm going to turn it back over to Christina.
Oh, well, I think that's it. You've said it all. Thanks, Clara. Yeah, and thank you all for coming. I mean, I don't know if we need to say much more to wrap up than to say thank you so much for coming and spending time with us this afternoon. We're looking forward to being in touch with you, and we promise to continue to be in touch with you by giving you updates. We have a blog that will be standing up where we're talking about little things that we're learning, and also just never underestimate what we don't know, because like there's lots of stuff that we don't know. We're learning a ton of stuff, but there's also a ton of stuff that we don't know. So, by all means, reach out.
Can Clara put her email in the chat?
Yes,
absolutely.
Yeah, there's a lot of post-pandemic funding that is still relevant. It's not only at this point about loss, it's about getting artists to work. So there may be options there.
All right. Well, I think I'm going to use this moment to turn off the recording. And